If you're a B2B business, a B2B tech company, or a B2B marketer, you're in the right place. Coming to you from Studio 26, this is the Interesting B2B Marketers podcast, bringing you interesting contemporary takes, industry tips, guest interviews, and true stories from B2B marketers in the trenches. Now, here's your host, Steve Goldhaber.
Hey everybody, it's Steve. Welcome to Studio 26 and the Interesting B2B Marketers podcast. I'm really excited today. Katie, welcome officially to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Steve. It's funny. I don't consider myself interesting, but I guess we're about to find out.
Well, I guess the most boring B2B marketers, I could have put it that way. That may have caused more intrigue because it would be like a contest. Who can be that boring? No, we all are. I'm a big believer in the fact that we are all very interesting. We're just not interesting to ourselves because we know ourselves, but other people always find us interesting. All right, and we're going to find out more about that in a second, what makes you interesting. But give us a 60-second intro before we jump into the case studies.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Katie Robbert. I am co-founder and CEO of Trust Insights. We are a marketing analytics and data agency. My role is to basically herd the cats, keep our data science team in line, client relationships. And when I'm not doing that, I'm hanging out with my dog. I'm outside and untethered and not on my computer. So I sort of have this duality of my life.
Yeah. All right. We're jumping into case study one now. This has to do with a term that I learned many years ago, and I didn't quite understand governance. And the way that I learned it was I worked with an extremely large company, right? And governance was essentially the code word for it's big, it's complicated, we need rules of the road, we need to manage all this stuff. So you're going to talk about governance as it relates to Google Analytics. Take it away.
Yeah. So just sort of as an aside, my background is in clinical trials and pharmaceutical work. So data governance was essential. And so when I switched over to commercial B2B, I started working with this client who were trying to get their web tracking set up correctly. They're an enterprise sized client and they were struggling to really make sense of their data. And so the first thing we said was, why don't we take a look at the infrastructure of your marketing tech stack? Because that's usually where the problems start. And so specifically, they were using Google Analytics to track their website activity. What we found when we took a look at their system was that it wasn't configured correctly at all. So they had almost all of the traffic coming into their website was unattributed, meaning you couldn't tell if it came from Twitter or LinkedIn or an email marketing newsletter or organic search. And they were spending a lot of money on their digital marketing activities. And so we were able to restructure and clean up the configuration of their Google Analytics instance. We talked through with, what kind of goals, what are the conversions that you want to see captured. And once we did that, they started to see better data come in. But the second half of that is that we had to introduce data governance, which meant that we needed to help them understand the correct process and management of how they were tagging things outside of their website so that when it came back into the system, it was coming through with good data integrity. So once we did those two things, once we fixed their system and introduced data governance, they were able to clean up about 70% of their unattributed traffic and finally do some attribution reporting, make some decisions. It was a big deal for them.
Interesting. Now, the beauty of Google Analytics is, it's so easy. You just take this little piece of code, you find someone who knows what a source, find the source code, paste it in the header or the footer, right? Like, I imagine that you see clients make that mistake over and over. Is that right?
I do. And, I think Universal Analytics, which is the previous version of Google Analytics, was a little bit easier to navigate. The newer version, Google Analytics 4, which officially becomes the version on July 1st of this year, is exceedingly more complicated for no good reason. You now have to use Google Analytics and Tag Manager and BigQuery and Data Studio and, all of their products. And this is by design from Google. And so for a company who doesn't have the time or resources or core competency to set these systems up correctly, but are reliant on the data to make decisions, is pretty much going to be up a creek. And that's where, I come in.
Yeah. So why has Google done that? I mean, besides secure future tech jobs for the next 50 years, right? Like, why would a company that is so good at making things simple through technology make it so hard? Any theories on that?
The unofficial reason is that they turned Google Analytics 4 into basically they took Firebase, which was their mobile web tracking app that was a companion to Google Analytics 3, Universal Analytics, and they basically reskinned that as Google Analytics 4. Their public reasoning was so that we marketers could have a better time across different devices, sort of tracking users across the devices.
Okay.
And it also introduced a lot more data privacy hoops, which in a way is a good thing. But for marketers who are talking about that single view of the customer, they're definitely not going to get it from Google Analytics.
Yeah. I'm going to take this case study and I'm going to sidestep a little bit because we're into an interesting data privacy thing. Tell us about like Google Analytics ecosystem as it relates to what Apple is doing and how they're trying to create their own kind of like, hey, we're not the bad guys, we're the good guys. Like, help us understand how to migrate those two different ecosystems.
So with Apple and with Google, so there was a lot of talk late last year and earlier this year about a cookieless future. And so basically what that means is that companies like Google and Apple are making it their mission to protect the end user, to protect the consumer, to protect data, protect privacy, especially when you have regulations like GDPR out of the EU and you have CCPA out of California, which really make it more important that we all abide by certain data privacy regulations. What that means for marketers is that we can no longer be lazy. We can't rely on, cookied websites to track people, to track their activity. We actually have to get off our butts and talk to people and say, what did you want? What do you like about us? And so it's, in a way, it's a resurgence of a voice of customer if companies are willing to put in the work. Otherwise, they're just going to lose a lot of data.
Yeah. Never underestimate the power of a marketer to be lazy. So don't assume that we can shape that behavior. There are lazy marketers all over there.
It's true.
So back to the case study, like you mentioned the outcome was better attribution. I'm assuming that there's just now they're in a place to make better decisions. What are some of the benefits that came from that governance process?
So what the client was able to start to understand was, were they spending money in the right places? And so this particular client has a tendency to just sort of throw money at different marketing channels, depending on which one they think is going to bring them in the most conversion. And so what we've been working on with them is actually using their attribution data to make smarter decisions to say, your email marketing is doing well, but you don't need to throw 100% of your budget at it right now. Perhaps you should also be looking at your organic social media, which drives a lot of awareness. It's sort of more of the top of the funnel versus the bottom of the funnel, which is a whole different struggle for them to wrap their heads around, because most companies, especially enterprise-sized companies, are focused on the conversion, not the awareness. And so there's also that education of, if you bring them in at the top of the funnel, they will eventually get to the bottom.
Yeah. All right. Nice. Let's jump into case study number 2. This is a sexy topic, natural language processing. I have become mildly obsessed with this category. So I'm eager to hear you share your thoughts on this case.
So as a disclaimer, we did this project prior to GPT becoming a household phrase. And so this was a few years ago. A client approached us and said that they were struggling to understand what their customers really wanted. The reason is because all of the customer feedback data was tied up in the call center. And so the call center, so you can imagine, is just like thousands upon millions of phone calls that may or may not be transcribed. And so they didn't have a good way to get into that data to figure out what product should be thinking about competitively next. And so this client creates beverage thickeners for alternative dairy beverage. So it's a very specific market. And for them to understand what clients want, they really need to get into that data. So what we were able to do was extract the call center data, have it transcribed. And so basically what we had was this just big pile of unstructured content using natural language processing, which is a lot of what GPT does. What we basically did was we created a script that found the common terms, so basically topic modeling, to say, what are the common themes and phrases, taking out, all of the ifs, ands, buts, like words that don't really mean anything. And what we were able to find out is that customers were asking desperately for an oat and almond alternative. They were looking for something like a hemp milk. So you can imagine sort of time frame wise, this was a few years back. Hemp milk wasn't really a known thing yet. So this company had the opportunity to say, oh, we should probably develop some sort of a thickener for a hemp milk using that as the base. We wouldn't have otherwise known that if we hadn't have done this natural language processing. And so it became a recurring quarterly project for them to figure out what are we missing.
That's fascinating. I've always been so into I used to manage call center marketing teams, and there's just such a rich area to learn. And I would always listen in on customer phone calls because it was just fun to see them react to marketing campaigns or struggle to find how packages were structured. I'm amazed that more companies don't do this, whether it's just talking to their call center people or adding just little quick surveys when you're done with a call, hey, just here's the one question. Can you answer it for us? It's kind of fascinating. How long does that take to do? So once you've got that data, you said you wrote a script. How fast is that?
Well, it depends on how much data we're working with. And so at the time when we did this a few years back, my data science team, my chief data scientist was processing this on his laptop. And so as you can imagine, it took longer than if he had built a data warehouse in the cloud. We're a very small business just starting. And so for us, we couldn't afford those resources at the time, but we knew we could do the work. And so he basically would have his laptop just sort of sitting like a brick, just running data. I think to process everything on and off, it took about 48 hours using up all of his CPU. But now, fast forward, if we were to do this again, we now can do this virtually in a data warehouse.
Yeah. I got to say, I subscribed to Otter years ago, and I loved the ability to just quickly go, hey, I remember I had a conference call with someone or a webinar, whatever it was. And the example I use is someone made a reference to a penguin, and that penguin was I know that there was something I needed to find right by that penguin resource. And I love the ability to go in, have AI generate all that text and just say, hey, all I have to do is type penguin. And 2 seconds later, I can click on that audio and go, yes, that's what I was looking for. So it is amazing the last couple of years how precise you can get and how strangely that works with my brain. I had the ability to remember ridiculous reference points sometimes, and I can grab that in AI generated text and get to something very quickly. And of course, that is just proliferated. Everything now has the ability to basically oh, that's just a plugin, and now you have AI or audio conversion in it. Is that something that more your clients are kind of hey, give me that? I hear more of this?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we've been spending majority of our time talking and educating pretty much anyone who will listen on the power of large learning models like GPT and the other ones that are out there. What's interesting, what strikes me, I didn't make the connection until you and I were talking, is that this case study is sort of almost like the phase 2 of the previous case study where you were asking about what does data privacy mean for marketers who are looking to collect that information. And this would be the way that they would start to do that. So you would hope that they would start, using these large language models to gather that rich information. You would think so. But to your point, we have a tendency to be lazy.
Yeah. This is just going to turn into the Lazy Marketers podcast. We're going to call out all those lazy marketers. All right, let's jump into case data number 3. This one has to do within the SEO field, specifically around predictive analytics.
So we had a client come to us and say they wanted to show up in Google as, the number 1 PR firm in their particular region, which is not an insignificant ask. So the first thing I always tell people is don't Google yourself. That's just not how organic search works. But what they were trying to do was outrank their competitors. And it's not enough for them to just put on their website, we're the best in the business. So what we did was we did a competitive SEO audit for all of the topics, the keywords that their competitors were showing up for in Google search. And we said, where are there opportunities? Where are there high-ranking keywords with not a lot of volume? And then also, where are the low-ranking keywords with a lot of volume? So we could sort of see where there was white space in between the two sides of the keyword research. But then what we did was using an ARIMA model, we generated a predictive forecast using the SEO research and also Google Trends data. So if you're unfamiliar, Google Trends should be a marketer's best friend. You can go to Google Trends for free. You can type in a keyword and it's going to give you a sense of when people are searching for a particular keyword or topic. So you can see the seasonality of it. And so using Google Trends, we were able to map out 3, 6, 12 months for them, the time in which people would be looking for those particular keywords that they wanted to rank for. It was going to get them higher up in the ranking rankings in Google search for the best PR agency in that particular region. And so we were able to help them increase that traffic by 40% by using that method.
I'm always amazed by Google Trends and how long it's been around and how people still don't know it's a resource. And you get some ridiculous use cases. For example, like there's a whole flu tracker every year where by region you can see based upon who's typing, like, hey, I have these symptoms or what are flu symptoms. It's amazing to have this living, breathing organism that you can just watch and go, wow, we can predict all these things. Why is it that, I don't mean to be so hard on Google on this call, but like, why is it that data isn't more accessible? More people, and maybe that's not even the right way to say it because it is very accessible, right? But people don't know about it. Why do you think Google always struggles with that?
Because Google is a company run by developers. And I don't mean to pick on developers, but developers, I can a little bit because I managed development teams for over a decade and I know their personalities and they are in their hearts, they're customer first, but in their heads, they're technology first. And so they don't think about the ease of use necessarily. They don't think about the use cases. They think, does this technology work? Is it a sound piece of software? Can you export the data? Great. That's your problem now. You've got the data. Go do something with it. Yeah. And so it's the same thing with Google Analytics. It was created by developers without really thinking about the end user.
Yeah, that makes sense. We should orchestrate a Apple and Google merger to take the front end design, customer centric thinking and apply it to the back end. Of course, that would never work out because it would take so while. Take such a long time for those companies to merge, and we would then destroy both companies and not have anything to show for it.
But now you've put it out in the ether, so maybe it'll happen.
Maybe someone's recording this podcast right now with some NLP scripts. And Tim Cook is listening because he tunes into us for all his ideas, maybe.
I think that's a plausible use case. I like that.
It's totally plausible. Wouldn't that be great if just randomly you get like Tim Cook to be on the podcast just out of nowhere? Like, yeah, I'll do it. Sure.
That would be a big get. Now, see, that's an interesting B2B marketer.
There you go. They'll be like, well, technically, I don't market. I just please customers. That's what I do. That's how he would phrase it. All right, let's jump into the Q&A part. Tell us how you got started in marketing.
Accidentally. I actually have a film degree. And so with my film degree, I went on to work in clinical trials. So totally, natural lead. What ended up happening was I got my film degree and I live in New England and the film industry hadn't come to New England yet. So as a 22-year-old kid, I could not afford to move to New York or California. So I needed to find something else to do with my time. So I ended up working as a product assistant at a company that was half academic, half commercial. And that's where I started to learn a lot about things like data governance, about development, about marketing and sales. And so over the course of about the decade that I worked there, I became the product manager. And that's where I started to learn about marketing. And so when I went to grad school, I got a master's in marketing and technological innovations because I really liked the blend of marketing and tech. And so when I moved on from that job, I actually joined as the director of a marketing technology team, which is where I then met the co-founder of my now company, Trust Insights.
Yeah. Okay. I got to say, so many people I've had on the show answer that question the same way. They go, I accidentally got started in marketing and then all of a sudden, it was actually really fun. So it's such a strange pattern. I wonder if that is true for most marketers. I got started in communication. So I have a degree in communication. So in my mind, it was always, I love the process of speaking and trying to sell something, but I feel very lonely. I feel like I don't have as interesting of backgrounds as our guests. But of course, that's why they're the guests, because they're interesting B2B marketers. What is it to this day that you just love about marketing?
The psychology of it. So what I really enjoy is trying to meet people where they are and understand what is it they actually need versus a company just telling someone what they need. And so we were having this conversation this morning when we were talking about a lot of natural language processing. And one of the things that's really interesting about it is that natural language processing, like ChatGPT, is really going to allow marketers to get a better sense of what the customer wants without necessarily talking to the customer, because it's all of this sourced information versus you saying, this is what you're going to have. This is what I'm marketing to you. So for me, it's always been getting into the head of the end user.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to pick up something that you spoke on before, as you alluded to the people at Google and the developer mindset. And you run a business, you've got to work with the developers all the time. What advice do you give to the marketers listening to the podcast to say, you know what, I don't think there's a one size fits all management approach. So I'm not looking for the one thing that you recommend, but as you've worked with all these developers over the years, what does work well? What are some recommendations on how to have a good relationship with each other?
I would say the number one piece of advice that I give to managers managing a technical resource is don't assume that they are smarter than you. It's just a different skill set. It's you having respect for yourself and your intelligence and your authority and what you bring to the table goes a long way for them also seeing you that way. So, Steve, if you said to me something about, Google's algorithms and natural language processing, the worst thing I could say to you is, okay, explain it to me like I'm stupid, because then what I'm doing is I'm signaling to you that I think I'm stupid. Therefore, you should also think I'm stupid. And that just sets the relationship off on the wrong foot. And so a better question would be, help me understand what that means for our customers. Help me understand why this is the solution that you've chosen and not something else. And it gives the developer or technical resource or data scientist an opportunity to step back and say, did I choose the right thing? Or how would I explain this to the customer instead?
Yeah, that's great advice. I have said my own version of that. I don't say explain it to me like I'm stupid, but I go to the default, explain it to me like I'm a first grader.
Same thing, yeah.
And it's the same thing. I really like the way that you reframed it, because you're communicating, I don't have the context for what this means. And you also need to put on we're working for a company trying to help customers hat. So I really like that. Maybe let's do a little deep dive into the NLP world. And of course, by the time the podcast gets published, it'll be all outdated because that's how fast that world is moving right now. But what do you see happening besides the obvious ones like generative content or, OpenAI has announced a plugin economy that essentially accelerates the way that data gets consumed and learns? Like, what do you think the longer term implications of all this are?
I think I'm firmly in the I'm excited about it camp. I'm not worried that AI is going to take my job. I'm excited for the things that it's going to automate about my job. So one of the things that large language models like GPT is going to be able to do is put together a marketing strategy if given the right information, or it's already able to interpret a presentation or a chart and say, these are the insights that I found. And so having that ability to scale, especially as a small business, to me is invaluable, because then what I can do is I can focus on the actions, the insights, the relationships, all of those human tasks that can't be replicated. So I'm happy. Let the machine go ahead and put together a plan for me. I can then spend my time refining it and customizing it.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to jump in things that drive you crazy now. We both are
This
B2B
might take a
service
while.
providers. Yeah. This is season 2 on things that drive you crazy. So you work with a lot of clients. And what I've learned over the years is like every client's at a different spot. You need to be really patient and understand where they are and where you can get them. What are some, for all the good and maybe bad clients out there, what do you suggest as they jump into the world that we've been talking about today? Give us like a little bit of advice on like, do these things, don't do these things. Yeah. What would you say?
This is the hardest part, because there needs to be a certain level of self-awareness of where you, the client, are in your technology journey, in your data journey, in your artificial intelligence journey. And so if, for example, you don't have good data integrity and data governance for a system like Google Analytics, you're not ready for artificial intelligence, because those are the foundational building blocks before you can even get into the more advanced technology. And I think that that's going to be the biggest challenge, is having patience. I want to go play with the shiny object. I want to play with the toy. I want to have ChatGPT write 500 blog posts for me and fire all of my writers. It's absolutely the wrong way to approach it. And I think that that's going to be the biggest struggle for people, for clients, for companies trying to get on board, is those foundational building blocks. It's sort of the same of, I can't just wake up and run a marathon if I haven't spent months and months and months of training and conditioning. I can try, and I'm going to fail miserably, and I'm going to hate myself for it. But if I put in the work from day one, maybe do a couch to 5K, maybe decide that I should probably get running shoes and not run in flip-flops, that I would have an easier time. It's going to take longer, but it's going to set me up for success in the long run.
Yep, that makes sense. I'll switch to the more optimistic side of the podcast. We're taking this show into a very, people are bad, data is horrible, they're going to get you.
Which is funny, because I'm the people person on the team.
All right, we're going to be positive now. What about your best client ever? What are some things that they did where you're like, oh my God, yes, do more of this?
The characteristics of some of our really great clients are people who are just open to hearing the good and the bad. And so when a client says, give it to me straight, tell me how broken it is, what do I need to do to fix it? I'm invested. That's a really great client, because that tells me that they are really wanting to be set up for success and that they will be successful. So it's sort of that flip side of the clients who just want to skip ahead to like the fun, shiny objects, but there's nothing holding it up. And so it's the clients that are just very open and honest and responsive and not trying to hide the things that have gone wrong. I mean, we don't get everything right in our own company. We just have to be aware that sometimes mistakes happen. We acknowledge them and then we move on.
Yeah, that's interesting and consistent with what I see in some of my best clients. The ones I've enjoyed the most relationships with, they just have no false expectation that they know it all and they're great at everything. They start out the conversation with like, here's what I got. Here's what I've had clients be like, here's what I'm really good at. I'm horrible at this and I need your help with this. And I trust you to help me with that. And, sometimes that's hard for clients to do. They view it as such a like, no, I'm in a position of power and authority. And if I concede any knowledge that I don't have, that helps or that hurts me with, negotiating a contract or trying to get something that they need. Usually the people who are the most humans are the ones that you then understand and care for and help out, as opposed to those who just kind of try to cram things through. So yeah, interesting. All right, last question. This is going to be more reflective on your career. So you've been doing it for a while. If you could go back in time and tell yourself, like your first week of when you started working, hey, do this or don't worry about that. What are some things looking back that you would have done differently?
It's interesting and ironic because the advice that I now give to my clients is the same advice that I needed to give to my younger self, which is to don't skip over the foundational pieces, the building blocks. Don't get too ahead of yourself. So I'm someone who's always been looking for the next thing. I was looking for the promotion, for the next steps. I would see that someone else was doing something and say, I want to do that. And my manager at the time, rightly so, would tell me to slow down, be patient, focus on what's right in front of me, master that first, and then I will be ready to move on to the next thing. And I was very impatient. I was ready to be the CEO at 22, but I knew nothing. But I was like, but he's over there doing it. I can do it too. And I knew nothing. And so it really was, I'd say the advice would be more patient and do the work.
Yeah, I can relate to that because I remember in my early 20s and I would read a job description for like, the next level up. And I would be like, I can do all these things. Like, it's so clear. But Steve, you've never managed a team before. But okay, I can do that. And it's like, well, it's not that easy. And I think we always, with age in our careers, look back and go, oh, that totally makes sense now. Yeah, like maybe I could have managed a team, but that team had to have all been high performers who didn't have any challenges or need growth in certain areas.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden you find yourself in a situation with, hey, you've inherited a team and you need to manage them. And there's like, you don't go to the team management webinar and 60 minutes later figure out how to manage a team. I still try to figure out how I can be a better manager of teams when I've been doing that for over 20 years. It's like, I don't think you can ever, there is no finish line. Using your kind of marathon analogy from before, there is no finish line. Perhaps when we are dead, that is the finish line. Like you will now no longer learn about human nature and how to manage teams. But
I don't know. I have a list of people who are going to be haunted by me. So I think it's just going to keep going and going.
I've certainly taken this podcast into dark and evil places. I don't know what's going on. Maybe it's
I think it's me. I think I'm forcing you into these dark and evil. In terms of the management, again, looking back, there was a time when I inherited a team that I didn't really know much about any of the players. And at no point in any of my management trainings or experience was I prepared to navigate a 3-hour, cry fest by 2 team members over whether or not we were a firm that used AP style.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And so those are the things that you just, nothing prepares you for that unless you have enough experience. I mean, I still to this day, I'm like, I don't even know if I handled that correctly. Like, it didn't matter what the answer was. It was more about the heightened emotions of the 2 team members.
Yeah. I've had similar moments looking back in my career that I started to change. So like when I was new or like I was brought in as the new leader of whatever team, I made it a point to try not to ever talk about work in my first meeting. And I tried to do it over lunch or coffee and just get to know them as a person and try to just disclose, I am not here to talk about work unless you need to, right? If you absolutely want to talk work, we can talk work. But I tried to always set that first meeting and connection up as a human one. Because in the past, I was like Steve, the happy marketer who was like, let's just jump into it. What's going on? What are you doing? How can I help? And that's my own advice. If I was asked the same question, it's always like, be a human first and a marketer second, because without the humanity of it all, the marketing doesn't mean anything, or it's harder to do if you're not connecting in meaningful ways with people. All right. Well, you have proven yourself incorrect in that you You disclosed yourself as not interesting. You were very interesting. I had a really interesting conversation. And I don't mean that in the weird, like, some people use the, oh, that's interesting. Like, she's interesting. It's good interesting, not bad interesting.
I mean, I've been called both versions and I'm not offended by either.
Yeah. That needs to be a LinkedIn profile description is like, I'm the good interesting person, not the bad interesting person. All right. Well, Katie, thanks for joining us on the show today. Remember, everyone who's listening or watching, like and subscribe. And until next time, have a great job doing all your great B2B marketing, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Interesting B2B Marketers podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you heard this podcast so you never miss an episode. If you found value in today's episode, please help grow the podcast by sharing with others and leaving a review. We'll see you next time.